Hello there! This monstrously long video that you are watching is Chapter 7 of my TearRing Saga Champions of Utena low turn count playthrough. In this map, we will be defeating the traitorous Duke Kodda and reclaiming Welt Palace for its rightful owners. This is the second map in the game where full recruitment costs us turns, because we will be recruiting Roger on this map, and he shows up fashionably late. In an incomplete recruitment run, this chapter can be completed in 6 turns, and since it's a castle map, that makes it the first map in the game where Runan's Urbanite skill outright saves turns. Another similarity this chapter has with the last one is that we are once again dealing with split-up deployment groups. In the story, the reason for these split deployment groups is that Runan's advisor, Eugen, keeps coming up with clever plans in order to defeat the enemy. But for us, it's less of a strategy and more of an annoyance that we just have to deal with. One of the deployment groups where Runan is up to the north of the city, while the other is inside the city already, but they're now trapped because the enemy secretly raised a drawbridge in anticipation of a clever plan like this. The first part of the strategy for this map is figuring out how to deal with Tom. He is a recruitable unit of the artilleryman class, and we need to talk to him with Barks in order to recruit him. This is usually pretty trivial, but I need Tom to move to a certain point in the map later on, and Barks is not able to recruit him immediately. So instead, we have to use Raffin to bait Tom to move his full movement on each turn until he can be recruited by Barks, who has been deployed down in the lower group. In the meantime, I have had Lee pick up an Armor Slayer from the upper house. As its name would suggest, the Armor Slayer is effective against armors, and it's significantly stronger than the Estoc, so this is what we're going to be using against a lot of armored enemies in future maps. However, doing this has actually put Lee in range of an enemy. You wouldn't expect it to be because bows usually only have 2 range, but many of the archers on this map are actually on top of terrain that grants +1 to their bow range, which is a very unusual thing for terrain to grant. This is the first attempt in the series to make the elevation of a unit give them a benefit in combat, and it wasn't implemented in mainline Fire Emblem until much later, with Radiant Dawn's ledge system. These towers also grant a little bit of a void, which makes getting the archers off them a little more annoying than it needs to be. It is a little frustrating how much of the map these enemy archers cover with their extended range, and I actually fall afoul of this later on in this map. On this player phase, we need to break down a door so that our 2 groups can reunite, and Raffin can continue to bait Tom down towards Barks. This is another place where Zeke having Kanto came in handy for me, because it meant he could attack the door and then continue towards where he needs to be next turn. Fighting doors is quite annoying in this game, because you can't double them, and in fact, you can't even attack them twice using a brave weapon. It's just 1 attack and then you have to move to the next unit. And this particular door has 50 HP, which makes it very hard to 2-hit KO. Raquel doesn't quite manage to finish breaking the door down after Zeke takes the attack, which made me pause and ponder for a little bit, because on my previous run, the door went down immediately after she attacked, and that meant that Raffin was able to finish off the Armor Knight that he fought on the last enemy phase, and then Kanto down to bait Tom further. Because he didn't quite manage to do that, I eventually decided to have Raffin finish breaking the door down. And that means that the enemy Armor Knight is then going to be healed by the Physic Bishop in the lower left corner of the map. At this point, what I'm doing is trying to get most of my units to go with Runan and fight off the enemy group that is coming down from where the boss was to meet us. There are some nasty enemies in there, so it's nice to have as much firepower as I can get to help deal with them. Especially Raquel with her brave bow. Enter unfortunately doesn't have the movement to get across Tom's range in one move, so she's going to have to wait up there with Lee until we manage to pull off that recruitment. There's not very much else to discuss during this enemy phase, other than the annoying physic jackass being an annoying physic jackass. So let's just take a moment to appreciate the sheer hilarity of Kaga deciding to include literal tanks in this game, as we see Tom's combat animations for the second time in this clear. Well, that was terribly satisfying. I'm terribly indecisive about this next move, but eventually I managed to get around to making Raffin finish off this armored knight, and then canto ahead towards the rest of the enemies. Next up after that is Vega, who makes a move on an interesting enemy. This enemy has a unique class, the Marksman class, which is not seen anywhere else in the game. It's kind of fascinating to me how many semi-unique enemy-only classes there are in this game, from the Lance Riders and Bow Riders through to the Spearmen and Bowmen. It really feels like Kaga wanted to make the playable units feel a bit special here. The rest of our units move into a position to keep Runan as safe as possible from the enemies after he takes the kill on the Marksman. Yes, we are still trying to feed Runan as many kills as possible, and this map is actually a really good one for doing it, because we are forced to wait around for Roger for so long. We finally get around to recruiting Tom at this point. He is, as mentioned, an artilleryman, meaning that he uses bows and is armored. So, like Norton, he only has 3 movement, and you might think that we wouldn't be using him. However, Tom has a key role in a much later map, so I'm actually going to be feeding him as many kills as possible, and so he's going to be using his entire move for most of the rest of this map in order to get to a place where he can actually get some kills, because there's no way he is going to keep up with all of our strong units going to fight the remaining enemies that are actually on the map. The most notable thing about Tom right now is that he has a really high base defense stat. What I want him to focus on when leveling up, however, is the skill stat, which might surprise you, but it is very important when it comes up. Now let's turn to look at one of the enemy artillerymen, who is now being attacked by Vega. This enemy has a weapon called a Chukonu. This thing is essentially a brave weapon on super steroids. Instead of making every attack into 2 attacks, it turns every attack into 4 attacks. And that means if something doubles with it, they're going to be making 8 attacks into you in a single round of combat. It is absolutely terrifying to have to face one of these, and you need to be really careful with how you position your squishy units around them. It's not terribly strong on its own, and it's also not particularly accurate, but it's still not something you want to be messing around with. And keeping this Chukonu artilleryman enclosed is a big part of why I brought all of my strong units over to this side of the map. Later on, we are actually going to get a Chukonu of our own, so that's something to look forward to, and it has several roles in making sure we get the lowest turn count possible in some later on maps. I'm grateful that most of this enemy group is armored knights, because several of our units need healing after helping Runan get some kills, and this means that our healers are going to be pretty safe, because armored knights don't move far and are really slow. Marouge is about to pick up a bridge key from a house. In this game, there are sometimes raised bridges over rivers, which essentially act as outdoor doors, and they can be lowered using bridge keys. The intent of this bridge key being here is to let you lower one of the drawbridges to the east and reunite with the rest of your forces outside the city. But we are going to save this one, because in a later map, we're going to be able to use a bridge key in order to take a shortcut and save several turns. During this enemy phase, the physic guy is once again going to erase some of our hard work. And then, you're going to see the Chukonu in action. The artilleryman chooses to attack Raffin, which means he only ends up doing 3 damage per hit. But it's still a worry to see yourself getting attacked 4 times in a row. As a side note, the Chukonu is a really good way to break down enemy shields in a pinch. There's another artilleryman over near Lee, who has a brave crossbow, which is the second type of bow in this game to have a brave effect. Thankfully, it's not very strong compared to the brave bow that we already have, but it's still something to watch out for, and when we get one, it's going to be very useful in our hands. At this point in the map, most of the stuff on the eastern side is dealt with, and I'm having my mages tidy up the last few archers for some experience. Unfortunately, I make a mistake here, and I end up leaving Lee in range of a 3-range brave crossbow, so it's pretty fortunate that I just healed him up there. Meanwhile, the rest of our units are still working on ganging up on the Chukonu artilleryman to finally finish him off. Runan is actually going to be fed the kill here. His rapier is really proving its worth on this map with all the armored knights around. This upcoming enemy phase is actually the reason why I chose to use an angelic potion on Runan in a previous map. During my testing, I often encountered a situation where I would have to have Runan face both of these armored knights on a single enemy phase, and having the angelic potion allows him to survive both of their hits. They're not very accurate, but it's still important to have reliability in these situations, and I have had him die here. Martel is now approaching the enemy Physic Bishop. Unfortunately, she's not able to one-hit KO or double him, so he lives for another turn, but we need to get rid of him in timely fashion so that he's not around when we're trying to kill the boss. And then at this point I get a bit confused by the colour of Tom's sprite, and try to move him even though I've already moved him on this turn. I have to admit that I'm kind of annoyed with myself for not making these runs as clean as possible, particularly given the length of this video, so yeah, sorry about that. On this enemy phase we end up chipping down both of the remaining armoured knights, and Runan is able to pick up both of these kills over the next couple of turns. I definitely meant it when I said that this is a really good map for him to grind up a bit. Vega equipped the weak scimitar in order to effect this. He probably would have just wiped that guy out if he'd been using the Shram. Anyway, now we finally get to do what I wanted to do with Tom last turn. He goes into this blue-roofed house to learn the Gladiator skill. This skill is sort of similar to the terrain skills that we've already seen, but instead of being for a full map terrain type, it instead grants plus 20 hit and avoid exclusively during arena battles. Because of that, it's pretty obvious what my plan is to get Tom some experience during this map. There is an arena in the middle of this part of the city, and he is going to be going in there shortly. Getting the Gladiator skill was probably unnecessary, and in fact it cost me a couple of turns of using the arena for experience points. But I have had some bad experiences in there with 11 sword enemies appearing when I didn't expect them, and so I prefer to have the extra plus 20 hit and avoid when going in there, just to have a bit of a cushion. Plus, if I didn't pick up the skill here, there would be no opportunity for me to talk about it during this run, and I do want to talk about as much stuff in this game as I possibly can. There are other arenas later on in this game, but unfortunately Tom is not going to be able to get to any of them, so really the Gladiator skill is just for this map and no other. We have now dealt with almost all of the enemies on this map. We're just tidying up the last few bows still with my mages. Lee is about to have a really bad round of combat, missing twice against this single enemy, so Marouche is going to be able to pick that guy off. Meanwhile, Runan is getting the last armor kill over in the west. At this point in the run, I only had a few specific stat benchmarks in mind for later in the run, and I didn't know what I needed on any of the units that I currently have. So I'm basically routing and pouring this experience into people just so that I can have a bit of a buffer in case I need any of them to have decent stats later on. Most of my units are bunched up in the lower left corner, which is where Roger is going to appear soon. Because Roger comes in with some extra reinforcements who we can kill for some more experience, and Vega in particular needs some of that to help him on his way to level 10 and promotion. The objective of this map is to seize, but because once again of Roger, we don't actually have to push Runan too hard in this map. In fact, very unusually for a seize map, I'm going to be using Raquel's Mercy effect in order to feed the boss kill to Runan. Bosses are worth a lot of experience points, and Runan has already picked up a lot of kills over the course of this map. So this has turned out to be a really good experience haul for him, and his stats are now looking quite a bit better than they were even at the start of this map. On this turn, we're finally going to send Tom into the arena. The first thing I do here is have Plum enarmor him just for some extra safety, and then in he goes. The arena in this game is fairly similar to its iterations in other Fire Emblem games. You pay money, and then you fight an enemy, and if you win, you get money back and some experience points. This arena has some strange quirks, the first of which is that there is a weird variety of classes that can show up as your opponents here. This enemy unit is a privateer, and that is actually Holmes's personal class. Holmes is the second main lord of this game. It's really weird to see a lord's class walking around as just a generic enemy, and I don't think that this happens in any other game. We're about to finish off the boss, so let's have a quick talk about him before he's gone. Barom is a general, which is the promoted version of Norton, a heavily armoured class with very little movement. Of course, movement doesn't matter for a stationary boss. Barom's weapon is called a Swordbreaker, which is a special sword that if the opponent has a sword equipped and the Swordbreaker hits them, the enemy's sword is immediately broken, no matter how much durability it has left. There are some swords that are immune to this effect, but overall it's a very bad idea to attack into this guy with a sword. Killing the boss got Runan up to level 7 when he learned Adept. This is the last regular way of learning skills in this game. Each unit has a list of skills that it has at base, and then that the unit learns as it levels up. Sometimes units learn skills only if they're in a specific class, such as Sasha learning Paragon only if she is still in her Princess class. So this is basically the complete skill system of this game. You have class skills, skills that you learn from leveling up, skills that you learn from the blue-roofed houses, and skills that you learn from scrolls such as the Kanto scroll. Enter is getting in some last-minute healing now that the mages have finished dealing with the remaining archers. And then we're going to send Tom in for his second round in the arena. This time, there are a couple of enemies that the arena offers him that I am absolutely not going to let him go near, because they're using magical attacks, and we definitely don't want to deal with that. So, there's another quirk about the arena in this game, and that's to do with a unit's score. In this game, each unit has a score based on their stats and the weapons and equipment that they have on them. The arena takes this into account, and the arena master will prevent you from entering if your score is too high. In fact, if your score goes over a specific benchmark, he will actually ban you from ever entering the arena again, whereas there's also a lower benchmark in which he only sends you away to change your equipped weapons. Tom has overall had some pretty favourable arena enemies in this map, so you may be wondering why I was so paranoid about the Gladiator skill. But do note that each of these enemies tends to have a small amount of listed critical against Tom, and if those happen consecutively, there is a very real chance of him going down in here. At long last, turn 10 arrives, and with it comes Roger. Roger, as mentioned before, is Mel's fiancé, and he is a pretty nice cavalry unit. He has pretty good bases, but his growths aren't very good, so people who rely mostly on growths for analyzing units tend to think he's not very good. In this playthrough, though, he's going to have several roles in later maps that are quite important for saving turns. Roger comes with several skills at base. He starts out with Urbanite and Vantage, in addition to a new skill that we haven't discussed yet, and that would be Pavis. In a lot of other Fire Emblem games, Pavis is a very frustrating skill for you to face, because it completely negates damage against the user of Pavis when it activates. In this game though, Pavis is a little bit fairer. It has a level % chance to activate, and when it does, it raises the user's protection by 20 against the single attack that it activates on. This means that if your attack is strong enough, or if you get a critical hit, you can still do fairly significant damage even if the opponent activates Pavis, which is a much less frustrating experience than its iterations in other Fire Emblem games. Roger and Mel, of course, support each other, and there is one more thing about them that makes them unique. Similarly to Pent and Louise in The Blazing Blade, if either Roger or Mel dies, the other one will also leave your army. This is also true if you don't recruit Roger in this map. If you have Mel, she will leave after this map in that situation. Runan is now poised to finish the map, so all we're doing now is, as mentioned before, tidying up some of these reinforcements in order to get a little bit more experience. I'm going a little bit further than is strictly necessary here, because Bartz obviously does not need any experience points. However, even though it's a siege map, I still like to kill every last one of them. With that last little bit of grinding done, Runan is able to seize the map, completing the chapter in 10 turns. After the map, we're going to get 20,000 gold, and we are going to take that onto our first shopping trip of the game. we are going to buy several pylons, which are basically javelins but better in every possible way. They are stronger, more accurate, and lighter, and we need a few of them to give to all of our mounted units for the next section of the game. We're also going to buy a smith's hammer. In this game, a smith's hammer can be used on the map in order to repair one of your weapons. There are some weapons that cannot be repaired this way. These are labeled with a star, and in order to repair them, you need a hammer and staff. But using smith's hammers is the only way to realistically see the kill bonus in this game. And we are going to be using this one on Raffin's Killer Lance, so that we have plenty of uses of that, and in fact 2 Killer Lances when we get our second one later on. Incidentally, before I forget, the star weapons are also the ones that cannot be broken by the Swordbreaker. That will be all for this video. Thanks for watching all the way through, and I will hopefully see you next time.